I'll go ahead and get started. Hello, I'm Craig Stone, and today I'll be talking about CRTs during today's general body meeting. Before we get started, just a bit of news to go over. We have this Friday from 4 to 7 p.m. IEEE is holding an Arduino workshop in ITE 233. I believe we have a poster for it. I don't have it in the slides. This was a last minute notification, but if we can get the poster posted in IEEE general chat. But yeah, that's our upcoming event. So we hope to see you all there. And let's get into this. So, what is a CRT? A CRT, or cathode ray tube, is a type of display that uses a vacuum tube to accelerate electrons towards a screen of phosphors to create an image. It's basically the old large boxy TVs that were everywhere before LCDs existed. It was the first widespread display technology, being commercially manufactured from 1934 all the way to 2010, with LG manufacturing the last ones, I believe. And they use analog video signals and amplify them to the levels needed to drive the tube rather than decoding a digital bit stream. So, safety, I will be going into a couple things regarding the internals of a CRT. So, need to make sure to talk about safety. CRTs use high voltage, so use a lot of caution when repairing one. If you know what can hurt or kill you, then CRTs aren't too terrible to work on, but you just have to make sure to be very careful. Like in the diagram here, all of these things, most of these things are have high voltage running to them. The anode here, the voltage difference between the anode and the cathode, which would be back here, on a lot of sets is usually around like 25 kilovolts. So there's a lot of high voltage in CRTs. So as long as you don't touch this anode, anything that's covered in very thick rubber is there for a reason. And of course, the flyback high voltage transformer, don't want to touch that. But the yoke, sometimes you do need to actually handle that to make image adjustments. So that's not too bad. But the implosion risk is mainly on older sets. Newer, when I say newer, like 2000s or 90s sets, usually are built a little thicker, a little better. So the implosion risk is not very high on them. But it's very just important to take proper precautions to stay safe. So, before I go into how a CRT works, we'll just talk about. Yes? Okay. So, a CRT, the actual tube inside of it is a vacuum tube. So, it's a big thing of glass that's the inside is held in a vacuum. So, it's possible that if the set is broken, like if you take a hammer to the back of it, then it will definitely implode. So the all the pressure, atmospheric pressure, will rush in and basically sending shards of glass everywhere. But that's usually not an issue in normal use or normal repair. So again, so some advantages of CRTs. CRTs are no longer in mass production, but there's still many enthusiasts who still enjoy them today. CRTs have quite a few advantages over LCDs. Typical response time in a CRT is 1 to 10 microseconds, whereas some of the best gaming LCDs have around a 1 millisecond response time, so that's a better response time by a factor of between 100 and 1,000. And CRTs have a much better contrast ratio since they can reach much deeper blacks than an LCD, especially in low light conditions. And the built-in anti-aliasing that I have here, I have some images down here. There's just from the Star Fox title screen, which is the top one is an image taken directly from the emulator, and this bottom one is the image picture taken of the same thing but on a CRT. So I mean by that, the way the anti-aliasing is that you can see all these very jagged edges on here, and a CRT just by nature of how it's by the nature of it, since it's a purely analog display type and doesn't have discrete pixels inside of it, it helps smooth out some of these jagged edges. With motion clarity, since CRTs have to physically draw each frame, I don't have a diagram, but I can draw it out. So if we have a screen here, I change the color. How CRT draws frames is we'll just start at the top left. It draws each horizontal line, and then once it hits the edge, it jumps back to here and draws the next one and keeps going like that until it gets to the bottom, where then it'll jump back up to the top and then draw again. But since it has to draw the frames are not persistent since the phosphors do decay, so it has to keep continuously drawing them. Whereas with an LCD, if there's a static image on an LCD, it doesn't have to keep changing the state of each liquid crystal to keep that same state. It can pretty much just go idle. So because of that, it can make motion a little muddier. It's kind of difficult to explain, but I do have a next slide on it. And the last thing is MultiSync, which, since CRTs have no native resolution, they're still to this day the only display type that can natively display multiple resolutions without scaling the image. And I'll go into more detail on that in the slide after this one. So first, let's talk about motion clarity. LCDs with a static backlight tend to smear motion, but recent LCD technology has gotten better where the backlight can be strobed to get closer to CRT levels of motion clarity. But this is sort of a worst case scenario. So this is just from the Blur Busters motion blur test. The top is a CRT at 85 hertz, and you can see that it's pretty clear. And the bottom one is an LCD monitor running at 165 hertz, but this is with a static backlight, and the the image gets smeared. And I'm honestly not entirely sure all of the mechanics behind it, but I just know that it does happen. So next I'll go into MultiSync. So I just have some examples with an LCD. This is my main monitor, where if I display it at its native resolution at a 2560 by 1440, it looks like that. But if I try to send it a lower resolution, like if I try to send monitor 480p on the video signal, then the LCD cannot just display the 480p raw. It has to scale that video signal up to the 1440p before it can display it. And most fast scalers are not the best. So it'll end up looking quite a bit blurrier, as we see there. Then this is an example on my CRT. My PC CRT monitor has a maximum resolution of 2048 by 1536. This isn't really a native resolution, but this is just I think it's limited by the pixel clock, just the highest frequency that the monitor can handle. And so you see it has a similar clarity on the maximum resolution to my LCD. So if I take it down to send it 480p, it does not have to scale it to display it. This is just displaying just 480 lines of video just natively on the CRT. And just a little comparison. In this comparison, you see that a little bit of natural anti-aliasing or just like general blending. And at least from where I'm seeing the CRT can make lower resolutions look a bit clearer and less muddy. But since the pixels are not uniform, it helps smooth out low resolution content. But at the end of the day, 480p is 480p, and there's only so much that can be done to it. So, how does CRT work? So, here's a diagram of the of just a color CRT tube, and the video signal comes in from these pins on the neck of the tube. Well, 3 of these pins. And this is the electron gun. It shoots the electrons for each color through these coils. And here we have number 3. We have focusing coils, which help to focus the beams even finely, so we don't have just a complete blur on the final image. Then the electron beam goes through the deflection yoke, which these coils literally move the beam from anywhere to anywhere on the screen. So that's the deflection yoke is what makes the beam move from left to right and top to bottom. And 5, we have the anode, which is pretty much attracting the electrons from the electron gun, so they move towards the screen this way. And number 6, we have a dot mask here, which it's a bunch of optics and physics that goes into the dot mask, but pretty much for each set of red, green, blue phosphors, it helps align the 3 electron beams more, so they actually align to the phosphors that they need to go to. And finally, the last one is a layer of phosphors, and these are chemicals that just coat the inside of the screen and glow when electrons excite them. So this is a example of a CRT I have. This is a Sony broadcast monitor. To get from a video signal to a video output on screen, the video signal starts on this board, and then I believe it follows this wire in. It goes on this board down here, and eventually gets sent to this big chip, which splits out the sync signals, the horizontal and vertical sync, which go up to the deflection yoke to control the horizontal and vertical movement of the electron beams. And then the color signals, the RGB and B signals, go into this chip as well. And this chip is, I believe, the OSD chip, which injects an on-screen display into the video signal for like a menu to adjust things. And then after that, it gets sent up, I think in this cable, up to here onto the neck board, which has, you see these three big MOSFETs on there, are part of the video amplifier for amplifying the video of each color to about like, I think gets amplified to like 70 or 80 volts peak to peak. And then after that, it gets sent right into the neck of the CRT and then gets sent, as we were discussing, to the screen. So this is a circuit diagram of a CRT, and this has pretty much all the pinouts that you'd see in a most tubes. So in a color CRT, there are three cathodes, which the cathode is what not really generates electrons, but electrons basically cloud around it when there's no anode to attract the electrons. So the cathodes basically generate the electrons, and the way that's done is by heating up the cathodes. So that's what these heaters are for. They heat up the cathodes so they release electrons. And then we can't just send it right to the edge of the screen with just an anode. We need a bunch of grids to control the flow of these electrons. And that's, on most sets, there's three grids. Some sets, they have a fourth grid, but that's G1 through 4. And I have more about the grids on the next slide. But the grids help accelerate and focus the electrons so they reach the phosphor layer on the other side of the tube. Here's another example of the grids. So each grid in the tube serves a different task in guiding the electrons towards the screen. G1, it is the control grid, which directly controls the flow of electrons. If it's on, the electrons are flowing. If it's off, the electrons are not flowing. G2 is the screen grid, which accelerates the electron beam towards the screen. So G1 turns them on and off. G2 sends them flying towards the screen. And then G3, the focus grid, finally focuses the beam, so you don't have just a blurry mess at the end. And G4, when it's included in a CRT, is called the astigmatism grid, but it serves a similar focus to the focus grid. It just helps focus the beam even more. So, are CRTs still relevant? It depends. Compared to modern LCDs, their power consumption is monstrous, they're extremely heavy, and they take up a lot of space. But they do still have their uses. If you enjoy retro gaming, CRTs are great for that. Since OLED PC monitors don't exist yet, if you want a gaming monitor with a extremely low input lag, a CRT is the way to go. Or even if you just have a lot of VHS tapes, then a little CRT television is a good way to watch those. And they're great for learning how to repair electronics because compared to current display types, it's they're a lot easier to understand how they work. So in current display types, everything is digital, and it's a lot more and parts are just a lot smaller. Pretty much everything on a CRT is large. So like you can see on this board here, a lot of this stuff is through-hole mounted. So the soldering is pretty easy on a CRT. And questions?
Yes. Um, what are how come? Well, why are like? I just want to know. Like, what's the technical reason for why CRTs are good for retro gaming?
Um, so for retro gaming specifically, if you want to play an older console, just for example, Super Nintendo, on any modern display, you're gonna need a an adapter and like pretty much an adapter from like composite video to HDMI. And most of those have, since it has to convert the signal to digital and it has to scale the image, scale the video feed, it that introduces lag. So there's a bit of latency since it takes time to do that. And for a lot of retro games, the resolutions, if you've been in the community any point of here, 240p being thrown around, which isn't technically like a real resolution. What it really is half of the standard definition resolution, since how just in a since standard definition television was an interlaced video format, meaning it draws half of the lines it needs, then goes back and draws the other half. LCDs can't do that. The only display technology that can do that is CRTs. So to deinterlace the video as well also takes um, time.
Are all CRTs like are there any like slimmer versions, or are they all just like extremely big and clunky?
Um, I mean well, of course, the thickness of the tube is pretty much um they do the thickness does vary, but for the most part, most of them are similar sizes. Like broadcast monitors are usually longer because they have a narrower deflection angle. So I guess good way to think of it is with a projector. If you if you have a projector very far away, the image is not going to be as sharp as if you put it closer to the screen it's projecting to. So that determines the length of the tube. And I think back like 2008 or so, or earlier, Samsung did make some slim fit ones, which were almost as thin as early LCD TVs, but they aren't that good because they can't focus very well since the deflection angle is just so wide.
How does the sharpness of a CRT compare to, say, modern monitors? Say, I believe there were some 1080 CRTs that existed. How does that compare
Yeah.
to 1080p?
Um, it kind of depends on the specific CRT, but for the most part, LCDs and OLEDs have perfect sharpness since it's a fixed pixel grid, where with the CRT, you basically never be able to reach as perfect sharpness as an LCD, but you can get pretty close with fine tuning it on some sets. Like one of my PC monitors is a Sony monitor, and that thing is just as sharp as my LCD, but I don't have any other monitors like it.
Cool.
What would happen if you tried to play, I guess, a modern 60 FPS game on a LC on a CRT? What would it look like?
Um, Actually, I think I have some examples of that, but a lot of times it can look better. They look pretty good. Of course, it depends on the resolution. I know some people have hooked up like a PS5 to a standard definition television, and it looks interesting, but a lot of text is basically unreadable. But if you're playing PC games and connected to a CRT PC monitor, it'll look pretty similar. Besides, like the aspect ratio and the colors. Um, I believe the color is depend is the color comes from the actual phosphors. So on a black and white CRT, the um the phosphor layer is pretty much just uniform. They just spray it on there. But for color CRTs, it's more of a grid like this. So each phosphor has a different corresponds to either red, green, or blue. Yeah, sort of like a sub pixel. Yeah.
Do you know if CRTs required more or less precious metals as compared to modern LCDs?
Um, I'm not completely sure, but there's like I know they don't need like lithium or any other super precious metals. The well, of course, the actual glass, the tube itself is leaded glass to protect against radiation leaking out, mainly just X-rays. But
Yeah,
yeah, I think it has fewer precious metals, but the manufacturing process is a lot more difficult.
that's okay. I just thought of it. So
Yeah.
Are CRTs genuinely regarded as obsolete, even though they do have those cool uses like you showed us?
They're pretty much obsolete. Um, Back in the early 2010s when LCDs were really taking over, you could still kind of make a case for it before the FCC took away standard definition broadcasts because then you could just plug an antenna into the TV and just get a signal. But nowadays, pretty much obsolete except for PC monitors. So you can just get a DisplayPort to VGA converter and run them just fine.
And the workshop is this Friday from 4 to 7.
Correct.
Do we have to show up exactly at 4, or like
Um,
is Okay, all right.
Where is the workshop?
Uh, what about attendance for today? Is that going to be posted or? Oh, okay, all right. Oh, this isn't necessarily a question about anything, but if I wanted, but do you know where I could go to ask about where another club meeting is being held? Like, I know this isn't exactly like related to anything, but I just oh it's for one of my other clubs that I've joined. I joined the photography club, but I can't figure out where they're meeting, and I just wondered if you would know where I could go to ask. Okay.
Um, the regarding the photo club, yeah, they're sending out emails on the email list. The last meeting, they're actually oh, that is today, 6 p.m. in the library gallery.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
Mhm.